1, 2. 1, 2. Is that okay? It's fine. Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the University of Bristol.
And thank you for coming to this evening's debate on badger culling.
The motion, which is, this House believes that culling badgers is necessary to eradicate bovine tuberculosis in the United Kingdom. So I can now hand over to the first speaker for the proposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. TB affects all species, whether it's cats, rats, people, cattle, badgers, you name it. Should we be eradicating TB? Yes, we should, because if we don't, if we ignore it and we let it run, we'll be back to where we were back in the 1930s to the 1950s when we started to get on top of it. So, how does this disease work? Well, the quickest way to transmit bovine TB, or any tuberculosis for that matter, is via breathing it out and breathing it in from an infected animal to a naive animal. And the testing itself is not an exact science. We have two types of tests. One is a skin test where you inject an animal on one day, say on Monday, and you measure how thick the skin is. We use two injections, one an avian and one a bovine injection. So we've got a comparative test. And that's important because that makes it more specific. And then come the Thursday, we go and measure those bumps again. And we measure the difference in sizes in those bumps. And if it reacts, because you've got a big bump, it's measured, that becomes a reactor. If the bump is only a slight difference, it's an inconclusive and it may be measured again. But as soon as you get a reactor on your farm, you are shut down. The failures of a skin test is about 20% of animals can go through the skin test and not react, which means it's a really good herd test, but it's not a very good individual test. We have other tests, like the gamma interferon test. With the gamma interferon test, you do get false positives, as opposed to the skin test, you get a few false positives, but only 1 in 1,000 cases. With gamma interferon, you probably get 3 to 4 cases per 100. So if you're in a clean area, you're a bit reluctant to have a gamma interferon test because you can be shut down for TB for a false positive. So it's incredibly complex, it's incredibly emotive. Why do farmers get upset by it? They get upset for all sorts of reasons. They get upset because of the restrictions. They get upset because of financial. And you may say, well, that's just about money. But you guys, coming to the end of the term, your grant, your loan is about to run out, you get a bit stressed. And it's exactly the same in farming. It's very tight margins. If all of a sudden you see your business going down the pan because of TB, you get stressed. Some areas, I believe it's going to be about cattle vaccines. And it's been NFU policy since 2002 that there should be a cattle vaccine, and we want to see the trials take place. There's going to be certain areas where I believe that badger vaccines will be an excellent preventative measure. But where you've got a high incidence of badgers with bovine TB, I do not believe that vaccines will be effective. But I sincerely believe, reluctantly, that in some areas, that the control of badgers is going to have to be part of it. How we do it, we do it different ways and think about it. But I sincerely believe, and I hope you support the motion, that controlling TB will involve some culling of badgers. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Why aren't you using the NFAIR chemiluminescent antibody test for late TB, which is a very rapid test, which picks up the active spreader cows which are missed by the skin test? The Irish are doing it. That's what they do with chronic herds. That's the answer. Why aren't you doing it?
I want to see more tests, like the multiplex test that's been done. We can do bulk milk samples and so on. Really into that. There's a real problem, though, with DEFRA and Europe about compensation, about whether it's because of notifiable disease. We need an independent group to look at the type of tests that are available worldwide and decide what is the most appropriate. If we have a 25-year strategy, we need to make sure we set off on that strategy with the best appropriate tests.
You mentioned about farmers going under due to positive tests on TB and then cattle being slaughtered. I believe that there is a compensation scheme in place. I just wondered if you could confirm what percentage of the price they receive back through that scheme?
It varies. I mean, at the moment, when we had our last on the heifers gone, we got about £400 a head less than the market price. The genetic loss in those animals was far exceeded that. If you've got something to a young man down in Cornwall recently, he averaged £850 a head for his compensation on his dairy cows. You cannot buy dairy cows for £850. You're more than that £1,500 to £2,000. you're not taking into account the loss of milk that animal is about to give you over the next 8 months. That is not included in the valuation.
Thank you, Adam. I'd like to call on the first speaker for the opposition now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why I really oppose the Badger Cull is because it's not based on sound science. It's based upon politics. What we've seen over the last 3 years with this coalition government is we've played politics with the future of our wildlife. If we want to look at science, if we want to understand the issue of badger culling and the possible benefits it will bring to reducing bovine TB, we only need to look back to the last Labour government and the randomised Badger Cull. The randomised Badger Cull was the best piece of peer-reviewed science anywhere in the world looking at this issue. It cost £50 million, it took 8 years, and it took the lives of 11,000 badgers. And the conclusion of that study was clear. Culling badgers in the way that we did last year, and possibly will do this year in England, will make no meaningful contribution to reducing bovine TB. Not only that, there are other key elements there that we must take account of today. Because the scientists involved came up with a number of key conclusions. Firstly, if you do kill badgers in the way that we've been doing, if you do not get a particular percentage, this 70% percentage in the area that you're culling, there is a high risk that you'll reinforce the disease in the animals that are left, and there's a very high risk that you will also cause disruption to badger colonies, which generally do not move around an awful lot, but you will move them. And if disease is in those badger colonies, it will move as well. So what we could have done in the last 12 months in Gloucestershire and Somerset is actually make a bad situation for farmers worse. So the randomised Badger Cull also came up with another very important conclusion. Long term, the only real solution will be farm-based measures. That's improving biosecurity, improving cattle controls, improving TB testing. That will make a bigger difference to reducing bovine TB than killing badgers. The first case of TB in a badger that was recorded was 1971. Since that time, the number of cases has increased. That's because, primarily, we've intensified our livestock industry. We now move 13 million cattle in Britain every year, more than anywhere else in Europe. And we are improving biosecurity today, and farmers are taking tough decisions, but often it's too little too late. Millions of cattle are moved. At times those cattle are moved when they haven't been tested properly. Passports can be altered, ear tags can be altered, and things are done that should not be done.
Well, I think that's actually slanderous, actually.
Well, I think it's a reality of a problem.
Well, you've got no evidence of it at all.
It does happen. There's evidence to indicate that you have fraud within the system. It's not every farmer, a small number can have an impact.
You'll exploit that.
No, there's information every year compiled by the Animal Health Veterinary Laboratory that will tell you that there are incidents where that type of fraud goes on, and you know that. I'm not saying every farmer's involved, but a small number can have an impact, and so we can't shut the door on that possibility. And let's not forget, badgers did not get bovine TB as a result of it coming from Mars. The case is they kept it largely from the intensification of the cattle industry. It is a form of industrial pollution. The question is, how can we clean it up to the benefit of farmers and our wildlife? And then we have deceit. I use deceit, it's a strong word to use. But there's a lot of information that's being peddled about this policy that is fundamentally wrong, where stories are being told that just don't add up. Firstly, we have to look at the level of disease in badgers. The randomised Badger Cull is the best research we have that would tell us that. 1.65% of the animals in those 11,000 tested who were killed showed late-stage TB, the super excretors that Owen Patterson often talks about. 15% had infection, but many of them had it at a relatively low level, and it wasn't certain what the long-term impact of that disease would be on the health of the badger or at risk of transmission to other animals or cattle. And then we have the issue of the other elements that we're told about badgers, the demonisation of this species. Badgers could give TB to cats, and cats could then give TB to humans. Front page of the Daily Mail. 3 cases in one area of the country. Crisis, panic. We must do something about it, says the National Farmers Union. I'm sorry. You've got more chance of your cat going to Mars than you catching TB from it. The chances are those cats that did get TB did not get it from badgers. They could have got it from rats, they could have got it from other mammals, they could have got it from feral cats. So the science will tell us that this is wrong. And we look at the randomised Badger Cull, it gave us all the information we needed. And if we look at what happened in Gloucestershire and Somerset last year, those culls failed on scientific grounds, on cost grounds, over £10 million wasted, on humaneness grounds, they were a disaster. Most of the contractors who were shooting did not take the measures that were sufficient to protect the interests of those animals when they were killing them. We do have another approach, the Welsh approach. The Welsh approach has been proved to work in terms of reducing, by taking significant cattle control measures, the level of bovine TB in cattle. We know we can do this. We can vaccinate badgers, it will make a contribution. We can vaccinate cattle, we need to speed that process up. And if farmers get on top of these cattle control measures, we will solve the problem of bovine TB without having to destroy our wildlife. That's good for wildlife, that's good for farmers, and I think it's what British people want. Thank you very much.
I don't remember whose hand went up, but there were a couple back there. Okay.
My name is Michael and I'm a vet student here. In Ireland, there's been a badger removal scheme in the South of Ireland from the mid-90s, and it's been shown that bovine TB has dropped. So why, if this is successful in the South of Ireland, would it not be successful in the UK? And it hasn't showed any risk of vacuum or perturmance, whatever you want to call it, there.
I think we need to be clear about a number of things. There's been a number of changes, cattle control movements and other changes put in place in Ireland over a period of time, along with extensive culling of badgers, of which they spend tens of millions of pounds. They've reduced the population significantly. Can you equate all the culling of badgers to that reduction in bovine TB? No, you can't, which is what the BBC recently found when it had to review its editorial policy about the statements it made on a website broadcast on that point. So, you know, that's all I would say at the moment.
Okay, Adam, very quickly.
Well, I think a different method there, but there is a different ecology of badgers. It is less dense, but I think what is more popular is they're doing a reactive cull when you get a TB outbreak. I would say we talk about Wales and England, but I can tell you now, you just have an annual test in Ireland for TB. There's no pre-movement testing. So in actual fact, I would say our biosecurity and cattle controls in the UK are far higher than in Southern Ireland.
There was a question first here, the woman in the...
Dominic iterated the 70% threshold that needs to be achieved for a cull to be considered effective. How do you feel you can go about achieving that in light of the badger's secretive nocturnal lifestyle? How can you determine that you've achieved those figures?
I think if anybody says they know how many badgers are anywhere, they need taking out and having a quiet word with. It is incredibly difficult to estimate how many badgers I've got. I don't know how many badgers I've got on my own farm. I know how many sets I've got, and that's what you tend to do. You tend to go and measure active sets. But is there 3.5 badgers in a set, or is there 5.2? Who really knows unless you put a camera up and count every set? So to be perfectly accurate on how many badgers are in an area is impossible.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call on the second speaker for the proposition.
Thank you, Chairman. The problem of badgers and bovine tuberculosis is twofold. Since the badger was made a protected species in 1973, the population has been expanding out of control. The second point is that a large proportion of badgers, up to 30% in some areas in the southwest, in Wales and the West Midlands, is endemically infected with bovine TB, some of which are excreting vast numbers of infectious tubercle bacilli into the agricultural environment. And this combination has led to a steep rise in the incidence of TB reactors in cattle. I'd like to take you back to the 1950s. A program of testing cattle, TB testing of cattle, was undertaken, and reactors were slaughtered as being infected with bovine TB. The incidence in cattle dropped precipitously until the late 70s. And then it plateaued. And in 1971, two of my colleagues described the first incidence of bovine TB in a badger. Thereafter, a program of culling was undertaken at a place called Thornbury, and it was decided to gas the badgers in this area. And the badgers were taken out, and it was estimated that they were all removed. 100% culling rate was achieved. And the incidence of the disease in cattle herds in that area dropped precipitously. But then, in 1997, we had the Krebs report. And Krebs said there was compelling evidence that badgers were involved, but it wasn't enough. And we then had the randomised badger culling trials brought in, and there was a moratorium brought in by the Labour government in 1997 on culling of badgers.
To have a point of information, have any of the controlled culls of badgers that have taken place ever taken place at a time where stringent cattle controls have not also been in place?
Well, the routine TB testing of cattle and slaughtering of reactors was carrying on in the country.
That's right. So the question is, how do you separate the results? How do you know whether culling badgers works or stringent cattle controls works? Because the information that we have now would seem to indicate that it's stringent cattle controls that are working. If you look at the case in Wales, where Owen Patterson said recently only 1.5% of the area of Wales came under the vaccination programme and no culling had taken place, that means that 98-point-something% of the reduction in Wales must be down to cattle controls, because it can't be anything else. Can you comment on that?
No, I'm sorry, I can't. I don't have those sort of details. But
I think we're having a proliferation of requests for information here. I'll just take one more from someone who hasn't spoken yet.
When you mentioned back in the 50s, the TET testing came in, accreditation of herds came in, and cattle were slaughtered as with positive reactors. I believe the incidence of bovine TB went from about 60% in the national herd to less than 1%. How many badgers were killed?
In that period, none.
That we know of.
But as I mentioned, the disease plateaued out in the late 70s.
I asked you the question how many badgers were killed. You've answered that for me, which is what I wanted to know. Thank you very much.
We don't actually know what the incidence in badgers was in the 60s and 70s. I suspect it was quite low, but we just don't know that. I should like finally to address the idea of vaccination. There are good vaccines and bad vaccines, and the Badger BCG vaccine comes under the latter category. Strategic culling of badgers underground in areas of endemic infection by the most humane method available, targeted by PCR testing, is the only realistic strategy, in my opinion, for controlling the disease in both badgers and cattle. And doing nothing is not a humane option for either badgers or cattle, which leaves targeted culling of infected badgers as the only proven strategy.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. I'd like to move on to our fourth and final speaker, the second speaker for the opposition.
Thank you, Chairman. Simon King. You've heard a lot of very complex points, and that's fundamentally the point. It's not a simple issue. We know that. But I think what we're failing to do, consistently failing to do, is to look at the very principle of value. And I want to wind this back because I, as Adam knows, empathise enormously with anybody who has their livelihood pulled from under their feet, particularly when they've invested emotionally and financially for many years. And yes, we want to do what is right, to do the best we can to eradicate the disease. And I think killing badgers is a tragic distraction and waste of money. We're talking about close-knit social communities of what I believe to be sentient creatures, and we're regarding them as an animal, as a thing that we can use and abuse according to whether it works or not. I would like to see some true facts about how a wild badger infects a cow. I'm not saying it can't. I'd like to see how. I watch badgers daily. I have cameras watching them nightly. They don't run around peeing everywhere. As you know, they work in latrines. A close-knit community of badgers works in the latrine and urinates and defecates in that latrine on a regular basis. I haven't got a single animal coughing, spluttering and emitting disease on my ground. I'm not saying there isn't one that's infected, but if we do a test in this room, I pretty much guarantee quite a lot of us are infected. Bovine tuberculosis is a disease that has been in the mammalian society in the United Kingdom for quite some time. We're taking out animals that may well have natural resistance. Yeah. And we are doing this because it's the best we can do currently. But there's a very strong argument that suggests we should be breeding a national herd that is naturally resistant. that we have the potential for natural resistance. I'm going to say something contentious. I'm not even sure that vaccinating badgers is something we should be doing, because I don't think badgers are the problem.
It doesn't work.
I think that's, well, okay, well then, if you say it doesn't work, Lewis, then you're also saying that none of us should have had the BCG. I did. I was a positive reactor and I've still got the lump. I should have been shot. No comment. We know from the randomised badger culling trial how everybody's questioning the science. It's the best we've got. And Lord Krebs, who, as Dominic said, and others, is not a particularly whimsical, romantic, mawkish chap, says categorically it can make no meaningful contribution to the control of bovine tuberculosis in the United Kingdom. Why? Because what he's saying fundamentally is the only way, if you're going to make that 15, 16, 18, 22% reduction because it's in badgers, you have to kill them all. Well, that's in contravention of the Berne Convention. It's not going to happen, and nobody's going to stand up for that. We don't want to see 100% eradication of a British native mammal that has been here for at least the past 500,000 years, if not more. They're in the fossil record. We've introduced the disease. It is our industry, and I drink milk and I like it, and I eat meat and I like it. We've introduced an industry that we need to shape up and sharpen up and control within our own house. Get it sorted, get it tidied up with all of the things you've heard, through control, through measures that make sure that we are maintaining a strong, robust herd, national herd in the United Kingdom, and stop villainising wildlife. We've got to sit up and take note of the economic impact of cheap food and the environmental impact of cheap food, because fundamentally we don't spend enough money on it. If you want to drink it and eat it, then we've got to spend more money on it, because we're not supporting an industry that provides it in a way that facilitates proper, considerate husbandry and maintenance of that resource. We have to be concerned about the value of life generally, our own, the livestock that we depend upon for our food resource, and our natural neighbours.
Just a point of information. I was wondering, in relation to the motion, which questions what exactly would be necessary to eradicate bovine tuberculosis, as well as the issue of whether or not to cull badgers. Could the speaker respond with clarification of any policy that he would suggest that, you know, the farming industry follows in order to ensure that bovine tuberculosis is eradicated?
Thank you. I would first of all say I think the chances of eradicating bovine tuberculosis in the British Isles are nil. So I think it's a complete fallacy. We're not going to do it. As learned colleagues will know, the disease can persist in warm, moist soil. The bacterium can persist in warm, moist soil for many months. So are we talking about removing every mammalian potential host from vast tracts of the British Isles for many months? Simply not feasible. Fundamentally, badgers are not the issue. The issue is within the husbandry and the management of cattle within the United Kingdom, the movement of cattle, and the way in which we, the consumer, demand our cheap products. We need to review all of these things, and that's what we'll get on top of it, as Wales currently seems to be illustrating.
Okay, I think we should move on to our rebuttal phase.
People talk about increased biosecurity, but don't tell us actually what it means by saying that. People tell us we need stronger cattle movements, but don't say what cattle movements restrictions we should have. Okay, but I'm going to tell you what we should be doing. How are we going to take this forward? It isn't a simple case of you have one procedure in all the country. You're going to need different procedures in different parts of the country. So we need good advice out in farms, we need good sensible movement controls, and in areas where we've got bovine TB in the wildlife at high levels, we need to explore better methods of culling so we can target the sets through PCR. But actually, because PCR only exposes badgers that are infectious, not infected. And that target approach would be far better than what we're doing at the moment. But no country in the world has dealt with TB in their cattle without addressing wildlife with TB at the same time through various measures. Thank you very much.
And now we return to our first speaker for the opposition for his rebuttal.
Well, thank you. I'm going to start where Adam finished, really, because I think no country in the world is an interesting issue for me. We are different to any other country in the world. We're a caring, compassionate society. We care deeply about wildlife, and we do put a value on it. That's why tens of thousands of people have been marching up and down our towns and cities over the last 6 months saying that the Badger Cull policy stinks. The culling of badgers is medieval. We don't need to be doing this. There are alternative approaches. And those approaches, rather than dividing the farming community from the public and the wider political factions and interests that are involved in this debate, we can bring people back together. And when it comes to vaccination of cattle, we can make this happen. The NFU, I'm afraid, has sat on the fence too long. Let's get out there, let's get marches of farmers down Whitehall demanding it. We'll never eradicate it completely. What we will do is bring it down to a significantly low level without having to destroy our wildlife. That's good for farmers, that's good for the British public, and at the end of the day, it's good for wildlife. And I will hold my head up high and say I'd be proud to be British to achieve that aim. And I think the farming unions need to think about that as well. Thank you very much.
So those for the motion, please raise your hand. Okay. Those against the motion, please raise your hands. Okay. These are the figures. 11 for the motion, and we have 72 against. I'd like to thank you all for coming along, participating, and could you all please give a warm round of applause for all our speakers?